Welcome to the Adversity Psychologist Podcast. It's Friday, it's always my podcast day. It's sunny, which we always love. And I've got a really interesting guest today that thankfully I've managed to be introduced to through the Trigger Hub. And we have an amazing chap called James. Would you like to introduce yourself much better than I will and tell us a little bit about who you are and what's brought you on today?
Sure, thank you so much for having me. I'm James Lindsay. I'm author of Befriending My Brain, a Psychosis Story, which came out last year. And I also work in mental health. I work for one of the local Mind charities in the marketing team. I've just been sharing my lived experience of my mental illness, psychosis and schizoaffective disorder for the last, I think it's about 6 or so years now. Just sharing, going on podcast, blogging, which turned into the book. Just trying to help people really, because psychosis is the worst thing that ever happened to me. So trying to help people either avoid it or help them recover from it, because it does really derail you, and it's hard to get your life back after such a big setback. So yeah, trying to raise awareness and reduce stigma and things like that. So thanks for having me again.
I'm so glad to have you. I'm a big believer, so people that follow my podcast, that sometimes I get introduced to people just in the most fantastic ways. It's all about who knows who and really valued connections. And we were just talking as well before we hit record. So I have covered psychosis once before with the fabulous Sarah Martin and her daughter as well. And it's lovely to be able to cover it again. I have so much. I'm going to dive straight in that I want to ask you. So what I absolutely love about having people on this podcast is lived experience, helping people understand what you've been through. And I love that you said there that, you know, the kind of preventative stuff, but also the support if you are experiencing. And we're going to bring in some lovely concepts like hope later on as well, aren't we? Do you feel comfortable letting our listeners know a little bit about your personal story?
Yeah, of course. It started, so in 2016, I was in a relationship, and then we broke up, and that was kind of the main trigger for my kind of symptoms. So I sort of moved out of the flat I was living with my ex-girlfriend in, and moved back in with my mum and dad's, and we got really bad sleep. So I had a few nights where I'd get little to no sleep. That really, it was a combination of lack of sleep and stress from the breakup, and that kind of led me to start the early warning signs. So like I was talking rapidly and jumping from one subject to the other, and I was having delusions and hallucinations. So I thought I was being tracked online, and through the radio and the TV, I thought they were sending messages to me. So yeah, my behavior got progressively worse and worse. Tried to get help for a GP, but there was a bit of a wait, and then during that wait, I ended up going in an ambulance to hospital, where I was sectioned for 4 weeks. So I had to live on a psychiatric ward for 4 weeks, which felt like the longest 4 weeks of my life, but I felt lucky as well, because a lot of people have to live in wards for much longer than that, which I've since found out since kind of sharing my story. So I was on medication, and had to take some time off work. So it was a really, really difficult time, and not just for me, but for my friends and family, because you sort of seeing someone you know well kind of behave out of character, and
that kind of, so literally there's so much there. We could almost do just a whole episode on your initial early days and experience. For people that may not be familiar with psychosis, are you comfortable just letting us know just those terms? People may be, you know, they may be familiar with the term but not really know what it means. A delusion versus a hallucination. Because I do think that's quite important for us to deconstruct for people.
Yeah, so a delusion is where you have a fixed belief of something which you're convinced is true, but people around you can't see it. So to people who are not in psychosis, like, they can't really understand what a delusion is, but for the person that is in psychosis, the delusion's like really real. So in my case, it was like thinking I was being followed and tracked online. And then hallucination is actually where it's like a visual, it's like a step up from a delusion. So it's like you're seeing things which aren't there. So I remember being in my bedroom one night, and like I had these things on the wall which are normally still, like a shelf or like a frame, and I saw them like almost zipping across the wall, like moving,
Yes.
which I
Yeah.
think was because I was so sleep deprived, like my brain just wasn't processing what I was seeing properly.
Yes. Yeah.
But I've
Yeah.
heard all sorts of people in psychosis having hallucinations. Like some people get like they feel like insects are crawling on their skin and things like that. And
So they can be tactile, can't they, as well?
yeah, yeah, it really differs from person to person. So yeah, it's very scary as well. It's very it's almost like you're in a dream
Yeah.
or a nightmare, but it's like it's not. You're awake, and it's yeah, so it's pretty terrifying.
And I think that's important for people to know as well. The reason I wanted to deconstruct some of those concepts is that I think sometimes early warning or kind of signs get missed because there's a misunderstanding about what psychosis is and what hallucinations are. And I think when you look in the media, look in the movies, fiction books, quite often people will talk about what we call visual hallucinations, so seeing things, but there can be auditory ones, so you can hear things, but also, you know, tactile things like, you know,
Yeah,
things crawling on your skin. But people may not demonstrate all of those things, or hence that it may get missed. And just as well, just in terms of that kind of pathway, so I want to bring in risk, if that's all right, because some people may not understand what is it that would make someone need to go somewhere that's a place of safety. So you were on an inpatient ward for a little while as well. Is that something that you're comfortable talking about?
yeah. So the way I was behaving before I got sectioned, I was quite erratic. So I was going out to like random places for different reasons, and then when I was in my bedroom, because I had this fear I was being tracked and watched and that I was in danger, I started
Yes.
throwing like random objects out the window, hoping that someone on the public would see me and like come and help.
Yeah.
Um, which is like very odd behavior and not something I'd normally do.
Yeah.
So I was kind of on the verge where like I was starting to become a danger to myself and potentially others, and so that's where the
Yeah.
sectioning comes in. I think when they assess you, they look at these things and think, would this person be safe at their home, or do they need to be somewhere a bit more confined where they can get the medication and the help that they need and the
Yes.
stuff like that? So that's what happened to me. So the doctor or the psychiatrist at the hospital made that assessment, and then yeah, I was in wards for 4 weeks, and I was on about 3 or 4 different medications as well. So it was quite intense, but it was a blessing in disguise because those
Yeah.
medications slowed my brain down and stopped me like speaking really fast and having delusions, and helped me sleep as well, very importantly. So like
Yeah.
my brain was able to finally repair itself, because I learned like how important sleep is. Like if you don't sleep, your brain loses that opportunity to repair itself, and then you're kind
Yeah.
of in a more vulnerable state the next day. So then if it's happening night after night, your brain's kind of slowly getting worse. So the
Yeah.
ward,
That
even though it was
build up,
terrifying,
right?
was yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The ward was completely like a blessing in disguise. Like I see it now as a very positive thing, even though at the time it was really scary. It was very necessary as well to make the start of the recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. And medication. So if we go on Instagram, if we look around social media, lots of different schools of thought. And I sometimes think that there can be a big misunderstanding around how important medication can be for certain mental health conditions. And is that something you could enlighten us on in terms of why is it that medication can be so important with psychosis particularly?
Yeah, I could talk about it all day, and it's interesting because the old me used to be a bit against medication because I was
Well,
like
that's why I
determined
wanted to
to,
bring it in. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I was determined to like do the recovery myself without any help. But now I've
Yeah.
accepted that the medication actually enables me to live the life I want. So I
Yes.
still
Yeah.
take a
Okay.
I still take an antipsychotic now called quetiapine, and I've been on the same dose of it for over 4 years now. And I take it every evening and it helps me sleep. And if I forget to take it and I take it late, I kind of won't get to sleep for hours, and
Right.
it's just not worth not taking, because if I stopped it, my risk of relapse is suddenly a lot more.
Yes.
And I want
And
to
that's
keep the
something, yeah.
yeah, I want to keep the life I have now, like my job and my hobbies and my socializing. I want to continue to do all that. So in my case, I think the medication's such a foundation for me to live my life.
And it's what we call, I love that term, value-based living. That the medication that you're on allows your body to do things. It promotes sleep. It allows you to keep safe, but it allows you to function in a way that means you can hold down your job. But then that extra layer of engaging in life in terms of the really valued stuff, which I absolutely love. And I always love to kind of deconstruct these concepts, because sometimes people can be very anti-medication, and there is a big movement at the moment to kind of move away from kind of diagnostics and talking about mental health in that way at all. But actually, I think it's very presentation specific. And coming from someone who's kind of been around a long time, I've seen different changes in how people are viewing mental health and how we should support it. You brought in a really interesting word there that I want to help people understand more about as well: relapse. So you had your initial kind of episode when you were unwell, you received the treatment and the medication that you needed. But relapse, let's talk relapse. Can you let people know a little bit about what do we mean by that concept?
It's kind of, I used to be very scared of the word, and like I didn't want to have a relapse, because it's like you think it's a repeat of the initial episode. And for me, there were similarities. I didn't get sectioned again, but I displayed the erratic behavior and the fast talking, and I wasn't sleeping and I was stressed. So it was kind of like the first episode, not quite as bad because I wasn't sectioned, but still very much a second episode. But so I've learned a lot. I remember watching a film where they were saying about how relapse is part of recovery, and that really kind of gave me comfort that a lot of people's recovery, it's not just a steady straight line, it's like a line that goes up and down, and you might have setbacks, and that's okay. So like, little relapses and lapses and blips, they are sometimes part of it.
I'm really glad you put it. It's a really nice way that you put that, because I sometimes refer to those little peaks and troughs. Because sometimes if there's a pressure to think it's got to be this kind of exact journey, can actually be detrimental as well, can't it? So in terms of relapse, is there anything you don't mind sharing in terms of what you've learned that might be factors that can impact your mental health, things that might lead to relapse? Have you got to a point yet where you've noticed anything?
So for me, part of my setbacks, as one of them was because I stopped taking medication, and I wouldn't advise this, because I stopped taking it because I didn't like how over sedating it was and taking away all my energy and sleeping too much. And I wrongly thought if I tried to come off it, they would just say, no, you got to stay on it, or they would. I had all these outcomes in my head which weren't true, like I might get sectioned again, and I just decided to just stop taking it and not tell anyone. And at first, I felt a bit better because I didn't have the side effects that were unpleasant. But after a while, I got ill again, and so I wouldn't recommend stopping medication without speaking to the GP, because it's very risky.
I'm so glad you felt. This is what I love about having people on with lived experience who are also comfortable or able to kind of lean into talking about the real, let's just call it the real nitty gritty. Because I don't think people talk about this enough, is that sometimes, we might try things and it doesn't work out, or we learn more about our mental health. We learn more about maybe what we call our kind of protective factors or our stabilizers, and what our destabilizers might be. And I know it's lovely you've talked about sleep, because I think that something people need to be aware of? Because there may be people listening to this podcast who have never heard of psychosis before and want to learn more. Professionals, maybe. There also may be people who have lived experience, but there may also be people who support somebody who has psychosis. And I think that's really important to kind of encompass all of those people, and knowing the difference, about what things are good to maintain your mental health, what things you've learned that aren't so good, but also those little indicators of relapse, things that might indicate things aren't going so well. And the kind of I'm going to ask a big bold question. What have you learned about yourself through this journey? Because you've been through an awful lot, because something led you to then want to put pen to paper, which we're going to come on to in a minute.
It's been a very big learning curve. I've learned a lot about myself, and I guess one of the most important thing is that trying to do it alone is much more difficult than just saying I need help and getting help from people around you. So that's kind of one of my first big lessons, and I've also kind of learned about what keeps me well and what to try and avoid that keeps me unwell. So I've learned basically how to stay healthy both physically and mentally, and sort of how to maintain that, and also what are my early warning signs. So when I start displaying them, not just for me, people around me might notice, oh, this is an early warning sign, what do we need to do to kind of make me feel better? So it's been a big learning curve, and with the medication as well, I'm on about, I think the one I take now is like the fourth or fifth different one, which I tried, and other ones didn't work for me. So it was learning that those ones aren't a good mix, like for my brain chemically, and the one I'm on now
fit, really.
Finding the match. So I'm glad I found that match that gives me kind of minimal side effects and the benefits. So there's been lots of learnings, like doing exercise, like doing mindfulness things, and just talking to people and kind of having these peer support groups where you can like give support, receive support. So it's been a lot.
It is a lot, and I'm just thinking how much people are going to learn from hearing about that as well. So kind of what I've pulled out from there's kind of learning and developing what we'd call a relapse plan. So when I used to work in the NHS and kind of adult mental health services, we would help people to put that information into a document called a relapse plan, which would help them know what works for them, what doesn't, what their early signs might be. And that may be something for themselves, but also it's something they could share with significant others who may notice things and be able to help you access support. But what I was also really interested there is that, what can support look like? So we talked about medication. Would it be useful to kind of help listeners know a little bit more about what, the who and the when and the how you can access different types of support, or what your journey was with accessing?
So like when I was recovering and I was under like an NHS mental health team, as well as medication, they also offered me CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy. So I can't remember how many sessions, it was like 8, 10 or 12 CBT sessions, one a week, and that was really helpful because that made me realise kind of patterns of my thinking and my brain that I need to sort of rewire, and that I was being very hard on myself. So I sort of learned a lot about like self-compassion and
really glad you brought that in.
Just being nicer to myself, and kind of rather than avoiding stress, kind of trying to not embrace it completely, but like a baby steps, like kind of to learn to sort of like cope with stress rather than avoiding it. And the CBT had like loads of really useful like practical takeaways like that, which I know is today it's part of like NHS talking therapies. A lot of their methods and their help is like CBT based. So I thoroughly recommend that as a way of getting help.
And you access that through the NHS? you've also mentioned support groups as well, and I love those two elements there. That you got something from it, but you mentioned something about being able to give and share information, which is also really evidence-based for being good for our well-being as well. Were those things you accessed through the NHS, or were they different agencies?
So my care coordinator, quite a few years ago now, when she learned that I follow football and I used to enjoy playing a bit, she was aware that there was a local charity who ran a men's mental health football group, and said, "Why don't you go along and try it out?" And I was a bit skeptical. I was expecting it to be very aggressive and very like other non-mental health football groups, which sometimes aren't enjoyable. But I went along and it's the complete opposite. It was very inclusive and welcoming and friendly, and I've been attending it ever since. And it's nice because there's a physical activity side, and then there's a talking side where we talk together, and we've got a WhatsApp group as well where we give and receive support.
I love
and
that.
it's really good as a group of men, to have that kind of outlet there, which is so important for me.
Yeah, and because we were talking before we hit record as well, I mean, there's that something around being able to give to others, not just sharing your story, but your lived experience, supporting people, but as well as you getting the support you need in that group. And I actually really like that kind of two-way relationship as well. Was there anything else? I'm just thinking in kind of support from kind of other people that maybe not professionals in your life. Is there anything you can offer in terms of insight there? How do people around you respond? What did you notice? Was there anything useful or not useful in terms of the support that you had there?
Do you mean like from sort of family and friends?
So kind of from non-professionals. So we kind of talked about the groups, the CBT, obviously the medication, but I'm thinking about the kind of more informal support as well, as you say, which might be family, friends, work colleagues, maybe peers.
Like my family were my rock, like through the ups and downs, and my friends were really good in terms of keeping me socializing with them, like kind of, even though I didn't feel like going out when I was just recovering from being ill, they were really supportive, and like they would say like kind of things like we'd rather have any version of you here with us than not at all, because I was going to the like meetups quite self-conscious that I was sort of quiet and a bit depressed and not my usual kind of chatty.
So that's interesting that there was some low mood in addition to the psychosis as well, which can be common.
Yeah, big time. Especially after the first episode, I got into a bit of a pit of being depressed because of what happened, like the difference in my life before and after the psychosis. I was kind of without a job, and I didn't really have much purpose, so it was quite hard. And I put on weight because of the tablets, so it was I was in a bit of a rut. So it's really important to have friends like kind of still speaking to you and encouraging you in that kind of headspace.
So, because I guess one of the things people might not think about is obviously it's not just about how you manage your body and your mind when you're not well, but it's all those other protective factors, that your job may be impacted. Relationships can be impacted, can't they? Just doing value-based living, being able to look after your health as well. There's a huge link, as we know, between mind and body. There's something about your story that made you decide to put pen to paper, and I'm just wondering whether that led maybe from supporting others in the groups, that kind of two-way relationship. Do you want to tell us about your book? Because people need to hear about this. There are so many wonderful professional textbooks on psychosis. We don't want to undermine those, but there is something about somebody writing from lived experience that I think is really special.
Thank you. Yeah, agreed. And it was actually something I got inspired to do it because when I was in that sort of pit that I mentioned, I was quite closed up about talking about what happened to me. And then I discovered a book by someone who'd also been sectioned multiple times with bipolar, and reading his story, it was like reading my own story kind of by reading his. And it was very powerful and it really resonated. And I kind of got that, if this book has made me feel good, maybe I can pass on that feeling, and started doing a blog. I had a blog published on the mental health charities website, which I then shared on my social media, which got a lot of good feedback, and so that sort of gave me the writing
Amazing.
bug. And then the blogging led to me discovering Trigger, who we're both associated with, that there's actually a publisher out there which specializes in sort of mental illness stories. So
Yes. Yeah.
decided to start writing the book because I thought I've been through a lot with this illness, a lot of trauma, and there's a lot in my head that I could put down as a story
Yeah.
which could potentially help people. So that's what I did. And yeah, fast forward to it came out last year. So it's called Befriending My Brain, Psychosis Story. And it's a kind of memoir style book, but it's also got lots of self-help elements of it as well. So it's got like
Yes.
recommended podcasts, music, all sorts of lists, and it's got like interviews with my family and friends who are around me. So it's not just told from my perspective; it's got their input as well. It's got my
Which is
doctor's
what I
notes.
love. Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite varied, so I tried to make it as varied as I could. So it's something that you can read with no knowledge of mental illness and get something from it, or you could read and you've got lived experience and you resonate with it. So it's just designed to help people in some way, shape, or form.
And that's what I love, that you can pick this up knowing nothing about psychosis. You can pick it up knowing quite a lot. And about that lived experience, what I really love is it's really eclectic as well. As you say, I'd call it a resource, really. It isn't just about your journey, is it? As you say, there are things in there that are helpful. There are links. I think that's what I like about Trigger Publishing as well, that the stuff that they produce is more about resources for people, but also kind of helping people understand more. Because I think sometimes what can happen with mental health and emotional health is that we can go straight to the doing part, the fix it. How do I get well? How do I manage? But you need to sometimes understand a presentation or a condition in order to manage it effectively. And that's what I really love about your book particularly. And one of the things we talked about before we hit record is this wonderful word, hope. And I want to bring that in case I forget. What is it for you about writing this book? The fact that you speak now, you do you go everywhere, you're sharing your journey, you're sharing your insight and your lived experience, which is just incredible. But there is something about hope, the kind of, why do that? Because it's not just about the information sharing, is it?
Yeah, big time. Because when I just after my first episode, like I had no hope. I was looking at my life, like I was looking at my future, thinking that I'd never get a job again, I'd never find a partner again, and I was in this I was stuck in this rut, and I had no hope. And then reading someone else's book suddenly made me realize that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and it's possible to make
Wow.
a full recovery from this sort of thing. And it's so important because then once you get that first little bit of hope, gives you something to sort of cling on to and to strive towards. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
the hope sort of slowly grows in you. And then you hopefully get to a position where you can give out hope to other people, which is, I think, what it's all about, kind of sharing that experience and sharing the hope.
So if there's someone sat on a train now, just about to get in bed and listen to a podcast, and they are in that position you were in, maybe in that early days of the journey, what would you like them to hear? What do you want them to take away from your journey and your book?
I remember like a quote or something I heard, which was like kind of how if things are really hard right now, keep going, not just for the version of you right now, but for the future version of you. Because when you're at that future, that person will look back to past you and be so thankful that you kind of stuck with it, kept going, and got them to where they are now.
I really like that.
Yeah, I think it's quite powerful.
It really is. You can bring kind of an image to mind, can't you, with that? And I guess one of the things as well is, I'm going to bring this into psychology, me that's been around a really long time, is there may be people who are supporting somebody listening. Is there anything that's helpful or not helpful? Let's do the big questions. from your experience? Because sometimes people might not know what to do. They might mean well in some of the support they offer or give. And I always think it's a really good part of a relapse plan is to also think about what is helpful from other people and what isn't, and how we might have conversations with them about that.
Yeah, there's a lot to say on that because you kind of want to find a balance of like sort of helping someone and
Yeah.
Sort of not doing too much, but you want to do enough. And it's like sometimes people just want to be listened to, like they don't want you to solve their problem, they just want to be
Yeah.
heard. Yeah, and I kind of learned because I did mental health first aid course recently, and the listening
Okay.
part is so important to
Really
like not
is.
interrupt them and to potentially offer some kind of signposting ideas, but not necessarily try and give lots and lots of advice and lots of opinions and judgment, to kind of try and show empathy and really trying to feel what they're going through, kind of understand it like from their perspective, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So I do hear that a lot from people that I work with as well. And I know, I think sometimes when we're facing something that's new and we see someone that we love or we care about who's struggling, having a difficult time, unwell, we want to kind of naturally problem solve, don't we? And that's a natural thing, and we can mean well by
Yeah.
that. But the problem with the problem solving is we can dive straight into it and we can forget exactly what you said, that sometimes it doesn't need to be about fixing things and problem solving. It's just about having a space to be heard. And that in itself is a doing, isn't it? Sit here, ask people what they want. I always love that question of what isn't helpful right now. You know, there may be days you don't want to talk to someone, or you don't want to be in someone's company, and there may be other days where you do. So, you know, just if people listening can kind of, because that could be applied to not just psychosis, but anything that someone's struggling with, is just provide a space to hear them, really hear them, not on the run or quick 5 minutes, but let's sit down or have a walk and try and catch that urge to fix or problem solve. Because that's often about how uncomfy we feel, isn't it, as well? And kind
Yeah,
of,
like getting down on their level. And
yeah,
I think,
yeah,
like you say, we quite naturally try and quick fix, but sometimes
we
it
do.
might be a slower fix process. And yeah, you need some more time sometimes.
That kind of, is there anything sort of thinking, are there any highlights in your book when you think back and all those hours of writing it, crafting, putting it together? What stands out for you in your book? Is there anything you're most proud that you've managed to get out there for people?
I think because it's like, you could almost say it's two parts, where I start off by kind of sharing the really like horrific, the first episodes, and
Right.
I'm proud of all the detail I go into, and there's actually parts which I cut out where I decided not to share, but there was a lot of stuff that I
Okay.
shared in it which I was kind of scared of sharing.
Yeah.
I thought I want to not overshare, but share as much as possible so it's authentic. And
Yeah.
even though some
Yeah.
of it people might think is embarrassing, and I saw it as well, if someone reads it and thinks, well, fair play for them, on you for being brave and sharing that amount, like, because it makes me feel better about what I did when I was psychotic, which might have been on the same level, and it
Yeah.
helps them in that way. And then I guess the second part of the book is really kind of the up and down recovery, and it's kind of showing people and demonstrating what has worked for me, and that it might not work for everyone, but it's what's worked for me, and it hopefully will help a lot of people. And yeah, it was a long process, the book, and recording the audiobook as well. It took a long time, but I'm glad, because it helped me kind of process it as well. It was very
I was just going to
therapeutic.
say that actually. What has it been like for your own therapeutic journey?
Yeah, it was because some chapters in particular were so hard to write because they got
Yeah.
a bit
I can
dark and a
imagine.
bit. Yeah, I had to be quite careful myself not to spend. I had to limit how many hours I spent a day doing it,
Right.
and if I wanted a break from doing it, that was fine. I could go for weeks, months just leave it and just go back to it when
And
you're
that
ready.
was okay, because that's the ultimate though, isn't it, in looking after yourself and knowing what your protective factors are, right? And it's sometimes it's very different, isn't it, having things in our head but actually putting pen to paper, making those purposeful marks or typing them out. I can make us
I
see
love
them
it.
differently.
The way it worked for me was that once I wrote it down, it was like it cleared up my head. Like it wasn't occupying my head as much anymore because I'd written it down, which I think is one of the lovely things about writing in general.
Yeah, that getting, because sometimes stuff can sit in our head a really long time, and there can be that moment of clarity of going, oh my gosh, that's how I see it, or that's why it's important, but also just therapeutically finding a place for things, helping perhaps even process some of the things that you've been through, because that is quite interesting actually. Maybe I need to have you on again to talk about the kind of role of the kind of traumatic impact. So, you know, when you're acutely unwell with psychosis, you've mentioned a couple of times just in this podcast, trauma as well. And I hadn't actually thought about bringing that in today, so I might get you on again if that's all right, and maybe we look at some of those elements as well. Where do you want to go from here? What do you want to do to kind of get your information, your message out there? So you've written the book, you go and do talks, so people can find you, can't, the Trigger Hub, so we'll put all these details in the show notes if anyone wants to contact you to do talks, lived experience talks, which is what I think it should be about. Where do you want to go from here?
I think I just want to keep, you know, going on podcasts, writing things, and I started working on the second book.
Oh wow, you got the writing bug then, yeah.
Yeah, it's a poetry book, but all the poems are like mental health based poems, and
oh, fantastic! I can't wait to read that.
Thank you. I'm trying to get it out there. It's proving difficult to find a publisher or agent, but I'm gonna keep chipping away at it. But hopefully we'll get out there one day. And I want to kind of keep up the writing as like a kind of secondary thing. Like I've got my full-time job, but in my spare time I do like to do a bit of writing for the purpose of helping people and stuff. So I want to keep doing that, if that makes sense.
Because it sounds as well about kind of two elements there. There's the getting your information out there, sharing your story, helping people understand more, but also it sounds like it's a really good thing for you to do as well.
Yeah,
writing is a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if people want to find you, which they're going to, where do you hang out on socials? Where can we find you? We'll put all of this in the show notes. So if you're listening to this either on YouTube or on your podcast of choice, you can just click in the show notes for all of this information.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm on Instagram as James Lindsay 23, and the book is Befriending My Brain, a Psychosis Story. If you just type it into Google, Amazon, it's very easy to discover, and it's on paperback, ebook, and audiobook as well. So depending on what format you prefer, it's got all the options.
Right.
The book's got links to my other stuff as well. So I've tried to make it as easy as possible to discover the blogs and things, which are also potentially helpful for people as a resource. Yeah.
People can just click and go, which is what I was saying, that I'm less likely to kind of type things into a browser. I do quite like a quick link. And we know about human behavior, it's much better to have links. So that's why we put quite a lot of stuff in the show notes. Now, I know you gave me a fantastic nugget earlier, but I'm going to ask for another one. So if there was one adversity takeaway that you could leave us with, what would it be?
I'm just thinking through like my favorite quotes and stuff. Like I quite like how the idea that the comeback is always stronger than the setback, and kind of as part of that, I don't think anyone's made a comeback on their own. Like kind of going through it alone, you're in a much better place to go through it by accepting help from others. So I think that's really important as well.
Yeah. So I've had 2 golden nuggets today as well, because I'm so going to think more about that future self as well. Yeah. So it's fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. I could just talk to you all day, and a lot of my guests, they come on again. So I'm definitely going to have you on again. Now we're kind of trigger chums as well, aren't we? Which is lovely.
Yeah, of course.
And keep spreading the word. And one day I have to meet you in person. I can get my copy of your book signed for my bookshelf. That'd be so cool,
I
wouldn't
always
it?
get yours as well.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I know. I keep forgetting. Yeah, that's coming up. I'm avoiding that, aren't I? I've got to lean into that soon. It's so lovely having you on, and I can't wait to get this episode out there. So make sure everybody go and check out James's book, Befriending My Brain. I love the title. I absolutely. It's really, you brought in self-compassion. I love that. Make friends with your brain. Sometimes our brains do things. Understand it. Make friends with it, which will help you, as you said, get towards that value.